seats. Our program will begin in 5 minutes.
quiet, I think because I walked up the stairs. I guess I did that. Wow. It feels really solemn in here for some reason. This is me with glasses, by the way. So I asked for the monitor. I have notes on the screens, and I asked for them to be bigger, and then I put on my glasses, and instantly the screens were bigger. It's an amazing thing. Good afternoon. It's very good to be with you. We're doing this town hall maybe a little bit earlier on the calendar than we've done in the past. That's because I think this is an important gathering. We're going to unveil the product of literally years, months and years of work in articulating as a follow-on to the statement of our mission and our commitments, a set of organizational goals. And that's the purpose of gathering here today. And I will say, I'm delighted that you're all here, but it's important, frankly, that everybody at the university understand what we're working towards together, and I'm a little disappointed that there are any empty seats in the House. And so it's important that you carry this message forward and underscore to your colleagues how this statement of our institutional purpose frames our work together. But this is an exciting time to gather. I know that there's a lot of darkness in the world today, and I would be a fool to pretend otherwise, but it is important, in some ways particularly important, at those moments to talk about some of the positives. So some of the positives are easy because they happen on the athletic playing fields, and there was a very nice thing during the Olympics, which we're all now curling experts, right? That's one of my favorite things about the Olympics. We watch this thing and then we're like, oh, yeah, that was really not the best shot, right? Should have gone for the stone on the right. But it was a nice thing to see our own Olga Mikutina skating in Italy, representing Austria. You might have seen her also working, I think, at the IT help desk where she works, and fantastic. By the way, what a perfect illustration of what our students are about, right? She's going to school, she's working at the help desk. Oh yeah, she's training to compete in the Olympics. That's a Montclair State University student, if ever there was one. Very exciting, and very exciting to see the students rally around her and take thrill in it. If you didn't know, also, our Bloomfield College of Montclair State University women's basketball team were national champions this year. Very exciting. Very exciting achievement. And by the way, there's an important point about that also, which is we were frustrated in our attempts to get the NCAA to acknowledge a new model wherein we would have these two athletic programs under one structure competing in different divisions. We didn't throw up our hands and say, oh, well, I guess it can't be done. Our team identified a different athletic conference, which I will not try to get the name of because I always get it wrong. United States Collegiate Athletic Association. Oh, it's on there? That's good, see? And I did it anyway. And now we found a new way to compete and a new way for our Bloomfield students to pursue athletic excellence while they work towards academic excellence. So I think there's a lot of good to be recognized there. It turns out there are other things going on. By the way, our men's basketball team here at Montclair State University, for the first time in program history, achieved a #1 ranking in the whole country during the season. That's pretty cool. By the way, athletics are important. Athletic achievement shows that we are cultivating the whole human, right? Whether it's as an academic, as an artist, as an athlete. That's part of what college is about, is developing human beings and giving everybody a chance to excel. And that's what many of the other achievements underscored. I was very excited to see that Leslie Wilson, who, if you don't know who Leslie Wilson is, I don't know where you've been. But Leslie Wilson was recognized as a trailblazer. Where is Leslie? Here somewhere? There he is up there. Leslie, congratulations on being recognized as a trailblazer at the 2026 Mega Symposium. The Mega Symposium was a great event all around. Where did Danny go? I saw him somewhere. There he is. Danny Jean, I said to Danny, one of the highest compliments you could receive is to be surrounded by your students. And one of the cool things about the Mega Symposium was you had a whole bunch of leaders come back who are advancing the cause of educational access and attributing their success to the EOF program, Danny and the team. What a great event to show what we are doing. At the same time, we had a remarkable investment in the university this year, a $5 million donation to name our Honors Edge program for John Martinson. This is a real vote of confidence in what we've been doing for 40 years, and we celebrated 40 years of honors at Montclair State University. A really important point because there's this notion, which I'll touch on again and again throughout the presentation today, that if you're going to be accessible, the only way to achieve that is to compromise on your standards and to give up your pursuit of excellence. And that is a lie. It is based in a whole bunch of assumptions about what people are capable of. And that is the reason why having the honors program and saying that a university like Montclair has to provide opportunities for everybody to achieve their full potential, that's why it's so important. So it's exciting to see us recognize 40 years of history, but also to celebrate where we're going with the significant investment that goes along with the aspiration to double the size of the honors program. I could go on and on about the achievements. Our communications and media students, now it's become sort of an ordinary thing that they are finalists in the Edward R. Murrow Awards last semester. We just are there with all of the top teams in the country every year. Again, excellence has to go hand in hand with access. And there's so many good things going on inside the university. I was excited to be with our University Collaborative for Inclusive Excellence, where the teams participating in that work gave presentations on their progress to date, figuring out how we make a stronger university, one that takes full advantage of every person in the campus community and is constantly looking at our own ways of doing things to see how we can get better. So there's so many good things going on. I hope people do take time every week to read In the Know and see all the good that's happening. I honestly think, and I know this is going to sound like a funny statement, I honestly think sometimes we don't realize how good we are. Like that we're just little old Montclair, normal school, and we do our thing, and it's a nice place to work, and it's a very beautiful campus. I don't think people understand how much good is happening here and how much interesting, innovative work goes on every day that we don't realize. So I really urge you to take the time to look around and see what your colleagues are doing. So that's a particularly important point, because we gather at a moment where if you open up your phone and read the headlines, you would think higher education is doomed. Like we're all just dead, right? That we're under attack, that we're producing no value, that Americans are skeptical of whether we should even exist, right? This is what you would believe if you just read what was in your feed. And there are challenges, to be sure. I'll talk about some of them. But I actually want to start by noting that the doom and gloom is misplaced. The doom and gloom is misplaced. So it turns out, for all of the rhetoric saying college isn't worth it, most people don't believe that. More FAFSA applications were filled out this year than in the history of FAFSA. So that suggests to me that people haven't given up on college, right? And interestingly, the constituency that is most committed to going to college are groups that are traditionally unrepresented on college campuses, right? Minority groups, first-gen students. And so in this country, people still believe that the most likely path to prosperity passes through a college. And so that's something that we should pay attention to. that people still want to go to school, that people still think that they can better their circumstances by going to a college, and that for all of the rhetoric saying a college degree is not worth it, the vast majority of people believe that it is. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have work to do, because we have to deliver on that promise. And so when people talk about the situation of debt, and if you want to see the opposite side of the coin, there was a headline noting that we are seeing a steady uptick to record levels of student borrowers in default. That's something to be concerned about. We see that people earning college degrees, again, a higher percentage ticking up, are in jobs that do not provide a better living than if they had no college degree. That's something to be concerned about. And we still see the problem of non-completion that we've talked about before. That's something on the order of 40%, 30 to 40% of people who start college never earn a degree. And so they're frustrated. And those people, those same people who filled out those forms, who optimistically believed that going to college was how they were going to turn their lives around and change the fortunes for their families, those people are frustrated. And they're mad at us. That doesn't mean that people have given up on college. It means that they are looking for something better than what higher education has delivered. That seems reasonable to me. That seems reasonable. I've gone to multiple gatherings over the last couple of months where I've tried to hear from people representing the administration what it is they want to do for higher education. I'm going to put aside some of the more ideological stuff. Really don't want to get into that now. But a significant part of what was being talked about was accountability, was transparency, was results, was delivering something that matches what people's expectations are when they go to college, that they're prepared to succeed after college, that they finish the degree that they're starting, that the cost matches what the return reasonably can be. I don't have any problem with those things. Now, it's a mistake when those people act like we in higher education don't care about those things. That's irritating. Okay, we have to do a better job of making clear that we get it. But I agree with those things. And if we don't address those things, then we will not be in a position to succeed. And there is enormous pressure, right? All we have to do is look around our own state, right? So you saw, obviously, New Jersey City University, Ryder. You may have seen Rowan most recently announced a buyout plan recognizing their own financial stresses. So I'm not seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. I'm not pretending that there are not pressures. There are pressures, extraordinary pressures. The point that I would like you to walk away with is that we are in a strong position to navigate these very complex times. We're in a strong position because we have a very well-functioning university, recognized most recently by a financial analysis that saw our bond rating reconfirmed and our outlook defined as positive. That's an extraordinary achievement for the people that work here. And we're achieving on an academic level. So we're doing well. The point of recognizing that is not say, don't change anything. The point is to say, how do we use our situation to prepare ourselves for the future? To make sure that we're adapting and learning and responding, addressing the challenges of the moment, not sitting on our own achievements and saying we don't need to change anything. That would be the wrong lesson. That would be the wrong lesson. And so I consider ourselves to be fortunate by virtue of our own skill, the talent at this university, and ready to blaze a path forward that demonstrates what higher education can and should be. And again, don't overlook how good we are. Right? I really wish people would take some pride in this and tell people about it. Tell your friends about it. Tell your families about it. Tell your neighbors about it. The Wall Street Journal says we're the #1 university in New Jersey, public university in New Jersey. Only behind Princeton. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. By the way, they say that because it turns out a Montclair degree pays for itself in about 2 years. That's pretty good. I'm not making light of the fact that students take on debt to go here, but the marginal impact of a Montclair degree on your income means that the debt that you take on to go to this university pays for itself in about 2 years on average. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. U.S. News & World Report says we're one of the top 10 schools in the country for social mobility. What does that mean? Their way of measuring that, just going to turn this off. Their way of measuring that is to say, what is the expected graduation rate given the student population that goes to this university? And I'm extremely proud of the population that we serve, right? Incredible diversity, majority, minority, obviously Hispanic serving institution, about half our students are Pell eligible. Sadly, all of those things predict not such a great graduation rate, because that's the reality of the country we live in. But our graduation rate is 15 percentage points higher than what you would predict it to be based on socioeconomic statistics. That puts us in the top 10 nationally. Again, something to be enormously proud of, something to improve. I'm not going to say that we're done. And something that will take hard work to maintain, let alone get better. But that's incredibly important. Both of those statistics, by the way, say something really, really critical. They say that the best education to go along with accessibility is not necessarily the cheapest education. Because you can have a degree that's cheap that isn't of value. The key is to come up with that perfect balance of something that is affordable but of sufficient value and of sufficient quality to make the return on that investment very high. So people say, well, education's too expensive. You wouldn't say that a car is too expensive simply based on the price alone. You would want to know what you were getting for that price. Right? And you wouldn't necessarily buy the cheapest car you could afford. You might stretch yourself because the value of a slightly more expensive car is much higher. That's what we're trying to achieve. Not to be the cheapest, but to have the most value, the most excellence at a price that is accessible to the broadest population. That's what we're doing. And it's something that we should take enormous pride in and tell the world that that's what we are, that's what we are about. And that's good not only for the families that we serve and the students who graduate, but good for the entire community, good for the country, good for the world. We've lost that thread, and I'm going to come back to this when I talk about the goals. We've lost the idea that education is a public good. We've focused only on the private good part, that it helps an individual earn more. But what about the fact that a society where more people have access to education is a richer society? What about the public good we produce through research, where we come up with the innovations, the inventions, the ideas that create prosperity in the years ahead? These are the public goods that universities produce, and we've forgotten how to talk about them and how to get people to appreciate them. So we have to defend our production of private goods, but not forget about the public goods that we produce. And we are doing an extraordinary job of doing those things. One marker of that, again, going in the category of achievements that we shouldn't gloss over. So last year we were recognized as one of the first 25 universities to be certified as a university pursuing leadership for public purpose, and creating a university where students are encouraged to pursue a pathway that involves contribution to the public good. This year we recertified that we are a community engaged university. That is to say that we have built in a commitment to partnering with the communities around us, that is a part of what we are as a university. So we have both of those certifications, designations. We are also, as people know, designated as an R2 research university. Now let's ask, well, that's a lot of different things that we're achieving on. We're doing research, we're engaging the community, we're cultivating a public service mindset in our students. Are there a lot of universities that are taking on all those things? The answer to that is no. No. In fact, there are only 6 universities in the whole country. There are only 6 universities in the whole country that have those. How many fingers do I have? Those 3 things. 6. 6. 4 of them are Hispanic serving universities. We're obviously one of those 4. And it turns out of those 4, only 2 of them are majority minority institutions. We're one of those 2. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I would clap for that. So there's this idea, again, that you can't do all these things simultaneously. That if you're going to be attentive to the community, you can't be a research university. If you're going to be a research university, you can't embrace access to the full population. If you're going to embrace access to the full population, you have to lower your standards. That is the common mindset about higher education. And it's formed in part because the media and so on are monomaniacally focused on a set of institutions that define excellence by how many people they reject. Right? And once that's your mindset, you say, well, they don't reject a lot of people. How could they be any good? That's a good argument, but you're then going to have to deal with us. If that's true, then explain us. It's not just us, I want to be clear. The other one, by the way, is Fresno State. But there are other universities like us. But we are part of a small set of institutions that take this challenge on. That's what you are all part of. It is not just I go to work every day and make widgets. Right? This is a differentiated mission playing a critical role at a critical time. And that's why I think we need to be laser focused on achieving that. I want to advertise to you that on April 9th at 12:30, I'll be giving a talk about the ways in which we will achieve the Leadership for Public Purpose and Community Engagement objectives. I'm excited that we have councils of faculty and staff who lead both efforts. This is a defining feature of our university. It's extremely important. I would encourage people to come out on April 9th. We'll be in the Feliciano School to talk about the future of those designations. But an incredibly important part of what we are doing. So, what are we? What are we as a university? We are a public serving university that seeks to make the world a better place by being accessible and inclusive, harnessing the creativity and talents of our students, faculty, and staff, and trying to deliver on the very purpose that the public created us to serve. And I never forget the fact that we were created by the public. And we respond to a board of trustees appointed by the governor to represent the public's interest in our institution. That is what we are. That is what we are. That is what we must be. And so the question is, what is the future of an institution like this? And people have asked, really since I've started, they're like, well, what about a strategic plan? Are we going to have a strategic plan? The strategic plan runs out in 2025. The SOAR, Project SOAR. Sounds good. It's a bird. We soar. As if, by the way, as if like when the clock struck midnight on 2025, we'd be like, well, what do we do now? I mean, we have a clear purpose. Everything that I talked about before, maybe it wasn't articulated in the same way, but this has been the orientation of this university for a long time. And we wouldn't have achieved the things that we're talking about if that hadn't been our orientation for a long time, and you didn't have a whole lot of folks buying into it. But I didn't feel like a strategic plan was necessarily what we required. One of the funny things about a strategic plan is it implies that you know exactly what's going to happen over the next 5 years or 10 years, right? Like an election that changes public policy affecting higher education pretty significantly. Our strategic plan would have said, for example, we're going to grow international enrollment, and that's going to be a centerpiece of our enrollment strategy. And we were doing that, and we were doing it very well until that changed. And so that idea of a strategic plan, a map that lays out where we're going for the next few years, didn't seem quite right for us. It seemed like rather than a map, which presumes that you know exactly where the roads are, you know exactly which moments are going to require you to make which turns. Like, that wasn't the right tool for us. What we needed was a compass more than a map. Something that showed us where we were going, what our goals are, what we hope to achieve on that journey, what the principles are by which we would navigate an uncertain landscape, right? And what capabilities we needed to develop in order to traverse this uncertain terrain. By the way, huge academic honesty points to our provost, who I said, well, this compass map thing, it's fantastic. I love that metaphor. And they were like, well, that was Fatma. Fatma's like George Washington. Like, well, it wasn't really me. It was this other guy. So she could have let it go. I would have thought it was her. But this, I think, this metaphor is exactly correct. I don't know exactly where we're going to be 2 years from now, right? You know, I couldn't give a presentation without saying the letters AI, so I've said AI. But kidding aside, that's obviously going to change a good portion of what we do. It's going to change how we teach. It's going to change what we need to teach our students in order for them to be successful. It's going to change the conditions in which we operate. It's going to change what's possible in terms of our own internal operations. So if I were to say to you, here's where we expect to be 3 years from now, like, that would just be goofy. But if I said, here's what we need to be in order to integrate the future of that technology into our planning, okay, now we're talking. And so that's what we hope to achieve by creating a strategic framework, and we've tackled this in stages. By the way, the stock art when you put in confused person looking at a map is truly hilarious. I urge you to look at it. I wanted to have like family looking at a map on a road trip. How many of you remember that, like screaming at each other over the map? No, that's not it. So the stock art has everybody smiling and grinning while they look at the map. Like, that's not how I remember. That's not how I remember it. Anyway, fun with stock art. So we started this process of building a strategic framework by figuring out how to articulate our mission. And that was the first step. Again, I don't think anything radical in the statement of our mission, but that's the why. Why do we exist? Like, why did we get created? And it gets into everything, and I'm not gonna repeat it now. Hopefully it's familiar at this point. But it gets into our objectives, and the commitments, in some sense, tell you the how. What are the uncompromising principles by which we will pursue that mission, right? And it's about our values, both the mission and the commitment. And so what comes next is the question of our goals within that mission. What are we trying to pursue, and how will we make those things actionable in our day-to-day lives? And how will we know whether we're successful? If we take the metaphor, and no good metaphor deserves to go without beating it to death. How will you know that you're going the right direction? How will you know, if you don't have a map to measure your progress, how will you know that you're actually getting closer to where you're trying to be? You have to have goals. You have to have goals. And so what I'm excited to do, and we'll hand out now something that's been in the works for some time and is the product of many, many hours of labor by a lot of different folks. It's a concise statement of what our mission, commitment, and goals are. And so let's pass those around. And this isn't intended to be a little piece of collateral that we look at today and then we shove it in a drawer, and we forget about it. This actually is intended to be a useful document on a daily basis that provides us guidance when we're thinking about how we spend our time, when we think about organizational priorities, when we think about allocation of resources. We should be able to turn to this and say, is what I'm doing today consistent with the mission, consistent with the commitments, and does it help us achieve the goals that we've set out as a university? Now let me be clear, and I'll talk a little bit about the meaning of these goals. It's not intended to be comprehensive. There are other goals. There are other goals that are not listed here. Obviously, if I were to list every goal as a university, it would be a lengthy document. And it doesn't deal with the specific goals that might pertain to your unit. And that will be the next step, and I'll come to this in a moment. That there will be objectives for every unit that flow from these institutional goals. So if you look and say, well, I don't see how this is me. First of all, every person at the university contributes to these goals, bar none. Bar none. Even the things that you may not say, well, I don't see how I contribute to that. I would disagree. The financial health of the university is pivotal for student success. The condition of the physical plant is absolutely essential for us to achieve our objectives. I could go down every part of the university. They are all essential to achieving these goals. But we will have to declare within these specific objectives for each unit, and that comes next. Now, there's nothing radically new about any of the things here. I want to point out that the 4 overarching categories are the categories that were articulated in our Middle States Commission on Higher Education self-study. Oh, I forgot to mention that. Small matter of a review by the Middle States Commission to reaffirm our accreditation, something that happens once every 8 years. It's a serious, rigorous review of the institution. The team evaluating Montclair was here last week and presented their findings. And if you weren't there, I'll give you here's spoiler alert. They evaluated us on the 7 standards and gave us a glowing review on all 7 standards, and in fact cited us as an exemplar for other institutions to look at. So, huge appreciation to the scores of people who contributed to that effort. I couldn't go further without singling out Joanne Cote-Bonanno, who made it her life's work to achieve that. But that was truly a team effort. But the affirmation that review provides should not be, again, just glossed over and say, oh yeah, it just happened. They literally said we were an exemplar as an institution. And by the way, they made suggestions as to how we could get better. Because of course we can get better. And in some ways, the most gratifying thing was that we'll call them the opportunities for improvement they identified, were things we were already working on. Which is good. It means we know our own weaknesses, and we're trying to get better. That's how it should be. So in that report, we identified these 4 areas. Again, this is why you don't necessarily need a strategic plan to operate. We knew that this is what we were about. To advance student success, to be excellent, to broaden our reach, and to be a robust institution. And so those categories are the categories that we set out to define goals that we could judge our progress on. And so I want to jump into them a little bit. You're all good readers, so I know you'll be able to look at this pamphlet, but I did want to touch upon a few of these ideas to talk a little bit about them. So the first one is incredibly important, right? That our objective is to serve a population that is reflective of New Jersey's population. And if we're not doing that, then we're not achieving our objectives. New Jersey has an incredibly diverse population. People come from all over the world, and one of the most far-ranging socioeconomic distributions in the country. Some of the richest people in the United States and some of the poorest. And so our goal has to be a place that embraces everyone in this state who's capable of doing college-level work. We don't do anybody any favors by admitting people who wouldn't thrive and succeed here. Now, we can figure out ways to build pipelines, working with partners in community colleges and so on and so forth, to get people prepared to come and thrive at Montclair. That has to be part of our purpose as well. But if we're not oriented towards serving the full diversity of the state, then we are not doing our job. But getting people into the university only to see them frustrated and unable to achieve success is a hollow achievement. And so we have to have objectives. And I'll be the first to tell you that after we hit the objectives in the second bullet point, we'll raise them. We'll raise them. Because 70% is not bad. It's not bad. But it still means 30% of the people who come here didn't get the college degree that they thought they were signing up for. That's a lot. That's a lot. By the way, if you look at that college debt statistics, the vast majority of people who have problems with debt are people who didn't earn their degrees. It's not people who succeeded and, the classic story, they got a degree in poetry and now they're a barista. By the way, that's now the computer science graduate, which shows you something about plans. A few years ago, the plan was get a computer science degree, you'll be bulletproof. Oops. Oops. So if we don't achieve those goals, then the first point isn't much of an achievement. Right? So the two have to go hand in hand. And to do so without it being affordable, without it being something that people can manage, well, that's not really accessible either, is it? So we have to think about how to do those things. And I don't necessarily believe that we judge ourselves based on rankings and so on and so forth. But there are these benchmarks out there which are useful to judge our performance versus our peers. And so we should be attentive to them. I don't want a few years from now to say, well, that social mobility thing was good, but we decided that's not important. No, I think that's a pretty good measure. And so these are the ways in which we will judge ourselves. I would note one that some people may be a little bit struck by the last two. It has been a notion that it is a violation of the idea of a liberal arts education to think about career preparedness. I actually think that if you take the first points seriously about caring about access, it's irresponsible to say, I don't care about post-graduation success. Because the notion of a liberal arts degree that was unconcerned with preparation for careers, that was a nice notion when higher education was only for elites who didn't have to worry about their future. But once you embrace the idea that you want higher education to be open to everybody, you have to ask the question, how are we preparing people for life beyond college? And if you're saying we think it makes sense for people to borrow money to earn a college degree, you have to bother yourself with the question of whether that person can get a job to repay that debt. So we have to ask whether we're putting people in a position to succeed. Now, that doesn't mean we're a glorified job training program. I actually think the question of how you prepare somebody to be successful is more complicated today than it's ever been, because we don't even know what the jobs are going to be, forget about 5 years from now, 1 year from now. So that's not a small thing, but if we're not thinking about it, then we're being irresponsible. And the last point is something that's near and dear to my heart, but should be something that we all care about. If we're not preparing people to be engaged, active citizens, then we have to continue to own the situation we find ourselves in as a country. And I would argue that part of the reason we are where we are is that we neglected our responsibility to prepare people for democracy. not just this university, education in general in this country. We took it for granted. We acted like democratic institutions, and preparation to thrive as an engaged citizenry, we acted like it was just a self-perpetuating reality. It's not. It's not. And so that has to be part of how we judge success as a university. Turning to academic excellence, obviously some of these things are easy to measure. The university achieved what doesn't even exist anymore, but R3 status in 2016, R2 a few years later. This whole system has changed over the last couple of years. The Carnegie classification has changed the way that they define these things. It's now reasonable for us to set as an objective that we will achieve R1 status. R1 status is achieved by virtue of the amount of money that we bring in from outside sources and spend on our research mission, and the amount of research-oriented doctorates that we produce. We can do those things within this time horizon, and we should. By the way, we should not just because it gives us this R1 designation, which most people have no idea what that means. Right? They walk through an airport and they're like, they see all these universities say, we're R1. Like, I don't know what that means. The reason why we should do it is because being a research university changes the nature of the opportunities we can offer our students. Showing our students what it means to be involved in the process of inquiry, in taking on difficult problems and solving them, is fundamentally different than the opportunities available at a school that's not a research university. And if we are going to prepare people to be successful in the future, they need to be able to ask difficult questions and understand how you evaluate whether you've achieved a good answer to those questions. How do we build knowledge? In an age of artificial intelligence, this is something that's quintessentially human. And we have to teach students how to use their brain in that way, or they will be easily replaced. And so this is not just about numbers, it's about the kind of learning environment we offer and the ways in which we contribute to the public good by taking on those difficult questions and offering new answers. We will have to build a culture that embraces that, and we will have to build a culture that allows us to very quickly innovate in the way we create new degrees, new offerings, new ways of people learning. The clock speed of the university, in order to thrive in 2026, but more importantly in 2030, in 2035, the clock speed has to rapidly increase. We have to be able to create new things, implement new things, and phase out things that are no longer relevant quickly. Based on an understanding, based on data analysis. That is how a university is going to thrive in the years ahead. And we have to be setting very high standards for ourselves. So that, I'm sure somebody like, I don't know what that means when we say one distinctive hallmark of excellence. It means that I'm not necessarily saying every one of our schools or colleges needs to be ranked in the top 10. But we have to be able to say what differentiates Montclair State University. And we have to be able to say that about every part of the university. Every part of the university. So we can say, well, I'll take our newest College of Media and Communications, that this is a place where students have unrivaled opportunities to learn in a hands-on fashion, that they learn by doing more than any other place, and that they collaborate with working professionals and skilled faculty to produce content on a daily basis. And there's no other university in the country that offers the same opportunities, and we see that in the awards that they win and the jobs that they get afterwards. And that we can say, therefore, this is one of the best schools in the country. We should be able to say that about every part of the university in one way, shape, or form. Because to not set that as our goal, again, is to accept the idea that, oh, if you're going to do those nice things, you can't possibly be good in the same way. So that has to be part of the objective, and we should encourage our students to go out there and get the scholarships and get the awards and be recognized. Our students are fantastic, but they're not as confident as they should be in their talent. So we need to get them there, and we can show them by doing it for ourselves. Amplifying impact. So a couple of people have looked at this and they've said, do you really mean what you say in that first bullet point? That you don't think the university is successful if the communities around us are not thriving? The answer is yes. I really mean that. And one of the reasons why people feel resentment towards higher education, aside from everything that I mentioned earlier, is that universities sat there with their nice endowments and their nice green campuses and their nice cushy jobs, and they said, why are people unhappy? Everything here is great. And yet, around them, people were struggling. Around them, people were having a hard time making ends meet. Around them, people were not graduating from high school, let alone going to college. And the people who were graduating from high school couldn't get jobs. And the universities were saying everything was great. I don't see how we can say that. Yes, it's very nice in Montclair, especially this, I don't like to say Upper Montclair, that's not actually a thing. By saying Upper Montclair, you distance yourself from the full community of Montclair. And it turns out the full community of Montclair, not everybody is doing so great, which is not to speak of our friends in Patterson, in Clifton, and the other communities that we serve, where people have real challenges, and we have the tools to address those challenges. Not by stomping into those neighborhoods and say, let me tell you how you do this, but by being a partner. And one of the ways we'll know we're successful is if people pick up the phone or send an email, whatever, date myself a little bit, and say, hey, I heard you're doing some interesting things. Can you work with us? We have ideas of what we could do with our children, or we have an idea of how we could do a development that we think would be good. We think the university would be a great partner. We'll know we're successful, and we're getting this already, when we start receiving those inquiries on a daily basis. That's why we have a community action nexus. That's why we have a community advisory board, is so that people feel comfortable coming to us, and so then we can achieve our goal of being an asset to the community, of helping people achieve their aspirations. And if we get our university operating the way it can, we will be an engine of economic growth and activity. We have certain assets that no other organizations possess. Thousands of students with energy and ideas, faculty doing research, classes that require students to learn by doing, that could be partners with communities that have needs. And again, all of this is happening already. The question just is, how do we accelerate it? And we have to judge ourselves by whether we're achieving those goals. So we have too many examples for me to run through. Some of you know about it, the public health partnership between Montclair and Essex County, which I've talked about previously. People are familiar with PSENG, Institute for Sustainability, and the Green Teams program. I learned just the other day about CSAC program to train regulators in how to set rates. There's stuff going on that I don't even know about, which is the best thing of all. And there are people saying, well, I'm doing that. Good. Let me know. I want to advertise it. I want people to know. But this is how we can achieve our purpose, is by taking responsibility for those communities. Not telling them what to do, but judging ourselves by how well they're doing. And I want to be clear, which is why the last bullet point here is so important. It's not only about the communities that are adjacent to the campus. We are part of a national and a global community as well. And we would be doing a disservice to our students and again to our purpose if we only thought about the immediate surroundings that didn't also think about the world that we serve. Now it's gotten a little more complicated in the last year, but that's neither here nor there. If it's a little more complicated, so be it. We will figure out how to connect with the globe and cultivate a mindset that our students see that as part of their responsibility as well. Last point, which can't be glossed over or minimized, which is if we are not a strong institution, we will not be able to achieve any of those purposes. So we have to be attentive to the institutional resilience, which is why it may sound funny, but why I talk about a bond rating at a presentation like this. And why we will talk about software updates and Workday Student and our website, and I'll get to that in a minute, because our operations have to be at extremely high level in order for us to achieve any of these objectives. And we have to be attentive to the ways in which we're supporting people to do all this work. So you can't just say, go out and do all this great stuff, be the best, be excellent, blah, 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 and just figure out how to do that. So I'll get to it in a moment, the next phase in the framework, which has to do with the capabilities that we're going to cultivate. But we recognize we need to recruit talent, we need to retain talent, we need to cultivate talent in order to achieve all those objectives. And we have to be constantly getting better, constantly asking, how can we improve? There can't be any self-satisfaction, and there can't be any resentment if somebody suggests that we could do things differently. That's just how you get better. That's just how you get better. And so this part of building a strong institution is absolutely essential to everything else that we're trying to achieve. So I'm coming back to there it goes. Coming back to our strategic framework diagram. And so this is where we're at, right? We're now at the institutional goals. Two things come next. One, the question is, what are the objectives within each unit? Both the academic units and the administrative units. How do these things translate into our operations as an organization? And this is a sneak preview of what's coming later, I guess in the summer is when we're doing the capabilities. What do we need to be as an organization and as people in order to achieve this? Because we're asking a lot. We're asking a lot. And so the question is, how are we going to have to evolve and how are we going to have to support people in order to get there? And so that's still to come. That's part of the compass, right? That's part of the compass. So there will be lots of opportunity to discuss this. As I say, I want those things not to be something that gets tucked in a drawer, but actually something that you refer to and that your colleagues refer to and say, this is who we are, is what I'm being asked to do, is what I'm working on today, is it consistent? Is it consistent with that? And that is a living, breathing document. So if you say, well, I think that there's something missing here, okay, let me know. Let me know. This will evolve. If you say, well, you unintentionally overlooked this, or I think that something needs to have more emphasis, let me know. It's a living, breathing statement of our objectives and our purpose. And so we will continue to revisit it. It's not a dead piece of paper. Now, let me touch upon a few practical things before we close up. First of all, there are a couple of people, they're not even new faces. Like, so this is the part of how you move on, you're like, is that person new? Like, I'm sick of them already. I shouldn't say that right before I'm about to introduce new faces. That was a mistake. But I think by now, people know Fatma Mili, who took on the role of interim provost in addition to being her interim dean. Duties have continued. She's joined us from Grand Valley State University, a similarly oriented university. And I say that because I don't want to pretend that we're the only university taking on the assignments that we've taken on. There are other institutions out there that are similarly oriented, and I'm excited that Fatma comes from exactly one of those universities and has already brought the experience and insights that she gained there and at UNC Charlotte, another school with a kindred set of aspirations. I also want to welcome again Suresh Murugan, who's our interim CIO. He's played this role at other institutions, the University of District of Columbia, Elizabeth City State University, and Bowie State University in Maryland, and there's a lot going on in IT. Obviously, we have the Workday Student, which I mentioned already. We're trying to figure out how we're going to deal with that AI stuff, and we have the small matter of the Zoom phones. And I mentioned the Zoom thing because it is a good illustration of why this is difficult. What I'm saying is difficult. It seems like a small thing, but if you're like me, that first day you walked in and looked at your desk and there was no phone, you're like, what am I going to do? My phone is gone. Now, I hadn't touched that phone more than maybe 10 times in the last year. I don't even think 5 times in the last year. And yet, my phone is gone. And so, change is difficult. Change is difficult. Even change that doesn't seemingly have a big effect on our life is difficult. And we have to be understanding of the challenge for our colleagues when we embrace change. So that Workday Student thing, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. There are a lot of people at this university who know how to do something in Banner, backwards and forwards, upside down. You could wake them up in the middle of the night and say, register this student in this class. Or they know who to call. Well, I know. Yeah, I can solve that problem. Just hold on a second. I'm going to pick up my phone. Oh, my God, my phone's gone. And so when we flip the switch on that thing, all of that knowledge, all of those tricks, all of that confidence will be gone. It's a big deal. That is a big deal. And you do that because you're trying to get better. Because as much as we tried to squeeze every ounce of productivity out of an outdated system that had all kinds of defects built into it, and we were pretty good at that, that might get us 10%, but we need to be 25% better. And it was never going to get us 25%. So we have to understand that that's the challenge that we're asking of people. And we also have to have correct expectations that the first year is going to be a bumpy ride. And it will be. If you don't think there are going to be problems, I don't care how much we get right. There will be problems. There will be problems. That doesn't mean it was a mistake. It means that you accept that as the cost of getting better. So, very excited to have Suresh on board and to lead that team. There are a lot of other projects underway that are going to make the university a better place. A significant one, which is one of these things that it's like, it's coming, but it's in the same category as the website rebuild. Joe is smiling, covering up his inner scream. But that's a real thing, by the way. So the most important thing to know is that there's a division of labor that's going to take place. So we will have montclair.edu. That is the outward-facing part of the website. And we will make that about principally recruiting students, building our public image, facing the outside world. And in order to make that effective, you have to strip away all the stuff that's for us. And all that stuff is going to be at inside.montclair.edu. And so in order for this to work, everybody has to pay attention to what's being built and read those emails from the communications team that say, we need you to take responsibility and get the information right. Because even though I know there are going to be problems, we can anticipate a lot of those problems. And so I urge you to pay attention to this. That is coming up soon. What did you say, 7 weeks? No, but 7 weeks until the deadline that we need for people to enter their information or something like that. So that switch is getting flipped on August 3rd. And so we need people to pay attention. And so if you contact University Communications or the person in your unit who is the web liaison, they can work with you to make sure you've got all the information that you need. A couple of other things. I know I'm at time, but I want to try and wrap up. It is I'm going to say it, the semi-quincentennial. We are trying to celebrate that. I will call your attention that I'm doing this lecture series. I've got one tonight, so it's a busy day for me. But I think that there are opportunities to join lots of different activities around the university, both at the Montclair and the Bloomfield campus, where there are activities to mark 250 years of the time since the Declaration of Independence, and talk about the state of American democracy. I would strongly urge people to engage. I'll be talking tonight. It seems like an unsexy topic, but I'll be talking about the ways in which we tried to balance populism with expertise in our country, whether you're talking about the judiciary or the bureaucracy, and how we've gone back and forth between popular control and an empowered set of judges and bureaucrats, who we now call the deep state, if we don't like it. But this is not a new tension in our country. And one of the themes of the semi-quincentennial is that the debates that we are having today are debates that have been present for 250 years. So again, if we're preparing people to be active in democracy, knowing some history, understanding what we're about as a country, I think is incredibly important. By the way, the last lecture for the spring will be on America's place in the world and how American democracy has engaged with the globe. So that seems timely. Speaking of the world, I'm also excited that with the World Cup coming to New Jersey, we are working to position where the various journalists who are not necessarily with a major television network but are here from around the globe to cover what is one of the largest human events that the world has ever created, that they'll find a home at this university and report on that from here. So more to come on that. A couple of events to highlight that I want people to be aware of. Our spring gala, Celebrate Montclair, is on April 16th. It's a great opportunity to come out and honor alums who have been contributors to the university, but also the achievements of this great university over time. And if you can't make it to that and contribute to the Carpe Futurum Fund, which will be the featured item, we have the One Day for Montclair on April 23rd, where there's an opportunity to show the commitment across this community to building a stronger university, and you donate to whatever part of the university animates you or is most important to you. So I'm gonna close there. I used all the time available to give this presentation, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. We have some treats and refreshments. Ice cream. Nothing matches the weather today like ice cream. It's always a good day for ice cream, but I'm happy to chat with you. I'm happy to chat with you outside. I'm excited that you were here for it. This is an important milestone in the evolution of the university, and I look forward to fulfilling every goal in that pamphlet in the years ahead. Thank you.